This is a short video on using the Pestel framework. The framework itself is, in terms of understanding, isn't too complicated. So we're looking at a range of tools. Pestel, one of them, 5 forces, value net, driving forces, and strategic groups as the other ones. So there's a bunch of them. There are overlaps between each of them. The idea behind all of these is that you're being very systematic in your analysis of the external environment. So please bear in mind that it's always a good idea to try and find a way of combining these frameworks to come up with your judgment about what's strategically important for the company and the industry that you have chosen to analyze. So they are separate frameworks. Do them separately to begin with, but when you get to the end, it is a good idea to think about the best ways of customizing it for the company of choice that you have, that you're analyzing. My main tips for using the Pestel framework are just 2 main things. One, visualization for impact. So try and find a way of bringing to life visually in your report your Pestel analysis. So don't just work with the text and just stating what they are. So you need to be able to try and communicate to the reader why your things that you've identified in your Pestel analysis is important. So work on visualizing the analysis that you're trying to present. And the second one is what you have in your Pestel needs to build your reasoning towards identifying opportunities and threats for the company that you are analyzing. So it's part of building your reasoning. So if something's there, expect the reader and expect, if you're telling someone, to ask you, why do you think that? And then that's when you get into the data and so on, and that you have built your reasoning to say, this is why I think say, for example, digital is the main opportunity facing, or this is why I think climate emergency is the main threat that the company and industry is facing. Now, we all know those 2 terms will apply, like digital and climate change will be applicable across every industry, across everything. So you need to then find your reasoning to explain why and how that particular threat or an opportunity works its way through to thinking about what the company should do. So visualization and reasoning are the kind of the main tips. And this is where those are the 2 things that I see students always struggle with in terms of when they do their Pestel analysis or include it in a broader external analysis. So let's have a look at the Pestel. You can Google stuff. It's in the textbook, so you can find all of them. But I just wanted to flick through a few of them. So, if you think of political, we can see currently the debate over the politics between US and China, and whether the companies that are operating in China will get banned or not. So TikTok's in the firing line, but Huawei has been in the firing line in the past, and so on. And with the US elections and so on, things can change rapidly within the next few months. So you can see the political impact. And closer to home, in case you've become too fixated on just the pandemic, Brexit is still around and it's coming back. So you have that as well as a potential external issue facing companies. Now, a quick pause for you to think about this. I had this discussion with one of the student groups last week, because Brexit's been around for a couple of years now, to say how big a threat Brexit is, or how big an opportunity Brexit is. So expect to be asked why you think it's a major impact on the business or the industry, or a minor impact. And think about whether trade laws across the globe changing are a significant impact, or something that the company has a minor blip to adjust and get on with. So they're not, they are key events, but you have to kind of work through your reasoning to say what the impact will be. So if you take something like Brexit, and if you take a big company like a Netflix or a Procter & Gamble or a Unilever or so on. These big companies are quite used to working across changing tariffs and working across borders. So yes, the change will maybe increase cost a bit, but it's something that they can cope with generally. So think about your reasoning as to where you think it's the major opportunity or a threat, or just one of the ones that they need to consider. You can think of in the environment, so under Pestel, climate emergency, it's a big one, and it'll affect industries differentially, and it'll affect geographies differentially. So depending on how the industry is structured, if it's a food industry, there's a big impact coming in different parts where food is produced. So there are different aspects to consider when you think about this as an impact on industries and businesses. And some of the other ones you may not be thinking about, but worth considering are aging population. So this is kind of your social demographic changes over time. So if the world is going towards an aging population, what are the impacts on the businesses and the industries that you're looking at? And finally, when one thinks of technology, there's clearly this issue around machine learning and artificial intelligence and its impact on businesses going forward. So there's a range here. So you'll see these are broad factors that you are engaging with. So your challenge is to bring this together in a interesting, visual, impactful way that builds your reasoning. So here's one example. There are many ways you can do this. So here's one example. So you can see with the visual impact here that you can see that there's a positive impact and the negative impact. So it's kind of signaling your opportunity and threat. But it's also signaling high, low, medium impact. So depending on how you make those judgments, this signals quite clearly where the impacts might be. So as a reader, if you produce something like this for me, what I'd zoom in on is looking at what you think are the high impact ones. So if, for example, in this case, the second one you have the US elections as high impact, I look to see that you have taken that forward in your report to say what are the impacts of that particular broad macro force for the industry. So this is where the reasoning kicks in. So this is visualization, and then the reasoning has to kick in to say the ones you have identified as the greatest impact, how are you going to factor that in your report? So both here are coming together, the visual and you're trying to signal which is the most important for the industry and the company that you're analyzing. A few cautions. These are some of the standard questions I get asked around using of Pestel, and as well as some of the other broad external analysis tools. First one I get asked is, should the Pestel focus on the company? Now, the main mistake you can do is to focus on the company too narrowly to begin with. Yes, you have to bring your analysis to bear on the industry and on the company. That you have to do. But if you start too narrow, you may not consider the broad forces that are impacting the industry and the macro environment within which companies operate. So the external analysis, you have to be systematic to try and identify the broad forces first and then work your way through towards figuring out what it might mean for the company. And this is when you're making your judgments around whether the impact is going to be low, it's going to be high, it's going to be impactful immediately, it's going to be in the much longer term, and so on. So you're making judgments. So the main mistake is if you start too narrow by focusing on the company and just look at the environment around it using Pestel. So think broad first and then narrow it down to try and reason through what the implications might be for the company. So what the other thing that good students do is demonstrate which factors shape not just now but also the future. So there's a good mix between immediate macro environmental issues such as Brexit and so on, or the US election, as well as climate emergency, as well as thinking about whether there's a trend towards digitization, artificial intelligence, and the like. So there's a good balance of not just now, but also looking at the future. So start broad and then work your way down to making it more narrow in terms of your analysis. And finally, just a few words on applying the Pestel framework, just to kind of summarize. Apply selectively, identify specific factors which impact the industry, market, organization in question. So work your way to narrow that. Identify which factors are most important currently, but also consider the ones that are important in the next few years and going forward. And this is what will determine how well you're doing, how well you do compared to your, in terms of marks. Use of data to support points and analyze trends. So when you Google Pestel for the company that you have that you're analyzing, you'll find a lot of Pestel analysis out there. So I'm looking to see that you can work through them and come up with your own reasoning and use up-to-date information. So we're not. So the whole course is based on keeping you absolutely engaged with what the conditions are now, not 5 years ago or not 2 years ago. So it is absolutely up to date. So the better students will integrate the driving trends that we're seeing up to date. And finally, the whole point of the exercise is to identify opportunities and threats. So this is what's going to be integrated within a SWOT analysis. So this sits behind the O and the T of the SWOT. So you're demonstrating that you have analyzed where the opportunities and threats might be, looking at the macro environments using Pestel framework. The textbook chapter goes through much more detailed, and as I said, for any company that you're going to choose, there's plenty of information available that you can Google and find. But you have to build your reasoning, you have to build your visualization to demonstrate what you think are the main factors from the Pestel framework that impact the industry, the company that you're analyzing. Thank you very much.